Welcome back to AI+U. I'm Becky.
And I'm Swag.
So Swag, wow, what an amazing, amazing.
Yes, you could say that again. Like 67,000 views across all channel contents.
We really didn't think so many people would tune in to the first episode.
I was jumping up and down when we hit 500.
I know. We thought potentially it was going to be, a lot of our friends. I thought at one point maybe my dad was just hitting refresh on Spotify, but just incredible. And it really shows that people are wanting to kind of chat about these things.
Yeah, and you can't even go to park, you can't even go to restaurant without overhearing people talking about AI. I was in a conference for the last couple of days.
Amazing.
And the moment, and my topic obviously was AI. That's what.
Oh, really?
Yeah, surprise. But when the moment I brought up the topic of AI, there was rapt attention in the room.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, I was literally mobbed, about people trying to understand what does this mean for us. Some people got scared, which was not my intention. But when I saw that amount of interest, it was not really surprising that we got so much attention, because it does hit a spot in public attention in terms of people do want to understand more about what is artificial intelligence, not at the superficial level that we see in our feed, but at a deeper level.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if we, look at some of the stuff in the news that's been being spoken about over the last few weeks, there's been a lot of chat around governments and AI, how people are talking about sovereignty, and a lot of investment into things like data centers, compute, etc. as well.
And so many foundation models have come out.
Exactly. Yeah.
So every big player, Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, they are coming up with their latest release of their foundation models.
Yeah.
And then there are trillions of startups that are sort of mushrooming around us, who are, most of them, and I'll put this bold statement out, most of them are putting a wrapper around the foundation models and pushing it out into the AI product market, which can be quite overwhelming.
Yeah.
But I think this is where we lack, and going back to some of our shared experience of talking to people, there is a lack of understanding of what AI is, and we touched upon that in our previous episode.
Yeah.
So what is an application, what is an agent, and what is a foundation model? So there needs to be more discussion around that.
And I think that is what we want to touch upon today, specifically around the question of, is AI becoming the new kind of global infrastructure? A lot of people, when they're, talking about AI just now, are talking really about the applications. Yeah. And we need to kind of go that step further, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And that would take us, so we are not going to sort of create this awareness that we are talking about overnight, but more we talk about it, and that is our goal in this show, is to talk more about and break it down into bits which are more manageable and we can understand and we can get our head around.
Yeah, so let's go underneath that a little bit.
Yeah, let's do that.
Something that we're hearing a lot about just now is the AI value chain.
Yes.
What is the AI value chain?
Well, so it is really one of the, and those of you, and certainly if you have seen my LinkedIn post, it is full of, I've been talking about it and I've been only talking about it because this is something that people need to really understand. So the analogy, there are a couple of analogies. One is that, so when we open, let's say, a ChatGPT window or a Copilot, right? And we ask something, ChatGPT, give me the 5 brightest idea for me to do today, right? What is it actually happening behind the scene? Yeah. Right? So we are sort of sitting on top of, on the tip of an iceberg.
Yeah. I love that analogy. When we spoke about it before, it very much is, you kind of see what's right at the tip, but you don't actually realize everything else that's beneath it.
The invisible layers, which are beneath the surface.
Yeah.
So it is an apt analogy because the entire AI infrastructure is quite layered, right? So, and there is a pipeline.
Yeah.
So if you start from the bottom of the pipeline, or the top of the pipeline, fundamentally, we depend on resources, natural resources. It could be electricity, power, energy, grids, etc., or could be natural minerals that sort of are used to build the hardware, like semiconductors.
Yeah.
So there are rare earth minerals which are found scarcely in select few places in the world. So all of that supply chain forms the base of the value chain, right? And then it leads into the hardware, which is semiconductor. And again, we know that there is a sort of a geographical concentration in terms of the supply chain for it. And once we have got the hardware layer, then on top of that, we have got the compute, right? The GPUs, etc. And again, enterprise-wide, there is a concentration there, right? And we'll probably come on to that later. And then we have got the data, right? So we need to, for any of these models to work, we need to amass massive amount of data, right? And then obviously there is a reliance on data centers. And then on top of that data, we build the foundation models or the frontier models, right? Which are the known names of the LLMs that we know of, the GPTs and Llama and Claude of the world. And then the final two layers are based on top of the foundation models. So first we have got the concept of agents, right? So the best way of thinking about it, and we probably need to do, and we are going to do
a full episode
on it. It deserves that. But very simply put, if foundation models are thinking machines, agents are thinking and acting machines. It just doesn't stop at thinking and coming up with ideas. It just goes ahead and executes those ideas. And then if agents are comparable to a particular task, then we have got the multi-agent systems or agentic applications, which are equivalent of entire team or functions, which comprises of many workflows, many different tasks, and then how they work together and how they connect to different systems, different data sources, and humans to create that alliance and to get a function up and running.
Amazing. Fantastic explanation there. And I think the reason why that probably is so interesting is that usually now when people are talking about AI changing everything, is that they're often focusing on that sort of top layer, which is from an application perspective. But probably when we, actually think about that in more detail, just because there's a new kind of flashy application agent, whatever, that doesn't actually equal the kind of strategic power of that value chain that you're talking about. Yeah, absolutely. And we are not saying that for every product in the market needs to sort of go down to that deeper level. But there has to be that awareness. There has to be a knowledge of where is your data coming from? Where is the compute coming from? What are the strategic reliance that makes it work? And that's where this awareness is very important. So in the alternative that we are seeing right now is that a product comes into the market, we just see the surface of it. And we see that it works for us. We don't even bother to think about where the data is coming from. And we touched upon it just at the start of the episode, but this is where the question around, sovereignty comes in. What does that really mean?
Yeah, so this is again a big topic which is closely related to the value chain concept. The sovereignty is, again, it's not a binary. So you cannot say that, well, this product is AI sovereign and this product is not. No product is fully AI sovereign. It's a matter of degree. So how much you are willing to own different layers of the value chain that we talked about. So you could be using the data compute foundation models and even some of the agents produced from a particular location. And then you're putting a wrapper around it, an orchestrator around multiple different agents. And you could be calling that, well, look, I have built an AI-enabled product. But that compared to, let's say, another product which builds its own foundation model.
Yeah.
Maybe relies on compute from somebody else. So that second one is more AI sovereign than the first one. And now, if we think about the world that we are living now, and if you cross AI with geopolitics, that makes it so much more interesting in terms of knowing where your data and compute is coming from.
And I think almost the question that comes before that you started to touch upon answering is, and people may ask, is, if all the best models are American, why do we not just use those? And you kind of touched upon some of the reasons why there.
Yeah. I mean, in some cases, obviously, we can use it.
Yeah.
But as long as we have control around it, as long as we have backups planned, it should not be the case that tomorrow, and let's not pick one country, tomorrow, if there is a geopolitical disruption or any trade disruption, supply chain disruption, then our entire infrastructure that we are building upon these products should not be disrupted. So these are, again, the fundamental concepts of managing systemic risk. But the key thing is to be aware. The second analogy that comes to my mind is that, so think of you go to your garden in the morning, right? So there are fruits lying around and you start picking on them. And then you get in the habit of picking fruits from the garden, right? But you don't care. And you never bothered to think about where those fruits are coming from.
Yeah.
Maybe those fruits are coming from a tree whose roots are in your neighbor's garden. What happens if the neighbor sells their place, right? So these are some of the thought scenarios, risk scenarios you need to start thinking about while we are sort of going full swing into the adoption, which we need to do.
Yeah.
But we also need to go with eyes wide open.
Yeah. This question around kind of, is AI becoming the infrastructure for our global economy, which is so interesting. And we spoke about it earlier on today, but, similar to what you said as well, I was reading an example recently about thinking about where, models have been trained in one place, whether that's China, America, wherever else. If we are then using them for something really simple, in some cases like marking essays at university or in schools, depending on, what they've been built upon, there's loads of things to consider, ethics, everything else.
Yeah, we need to talk about ethics as well.
Yeah.
Right? So there are two angles to it. And I like your example that, let's say you are using it in education in Britain, right? And you're using a model, but you are not aware of the data. Where it is coming from. If the data is not representative of education sector in the UK, then A, it could give you misleading results. And particularly when it comes to kids, that could be disaster.
Yeah.
B, there could be ethical considerations to it. Like, is the data culturally representative of the audience?
Exactly, yeah.
So it is a massive topic. And our goal here is to make our audience start to think about it.
Yeah.
Right? So we are not going to have the solution overnight. But every time you pick a product, be it at an enterprise level or at individual use case level, can we start thinking about where this product is coming from?
So let's make it real. Mistral.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that. I know it's something that you've been kind of talking about recently.
Yeah, I have been talking about it. Again, I'm not promoting Mistral. Okay? I'm not promoting anything.
It's just a very good one to kind of walk through. It is a very
interesting one. So I think if we have to talk about Mistral, we have to talk about the strategic roadmap that it seems France is trying to take.
Yeah.
Right? So I think we have all heard about the move away from the standard global productivity tools like Zoom, etc., etc. But much before that, for years, France has been investing into a champion called Mistral, to the extent that the funding and resources are concentrated, and to the point that they can build their own frontier models.
Yeah.
Right? So that sort of reduces, going back to our earlier point, that reduces their dependence on other frontier models, let's say Google and OpenAI and Anthropic.
The interesting bit, though, is that they still rely on the NVIDIA chips. So, it just pulls together that whole thing of that value chain, doesn't it?
Yeah. So it's a journey, right? So again, as you said, it's not binary. Is it completely AI sovereign? It's hard to be completely AI sovereign because, as you said, the resources and semiconductors has got a built-in asymmetry in the global supply chain. But they are at least trying to get down that chain or get up that chain to get as sovereign as possible.
Yeah, it's a journey, right?
Yeah, it's a journey.
So today we're going to kind of look across the stack, kind of have a think with what we've spoken about around the value chain. And we have Gordon with us today.
Hello.
Hello, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Yeah, how are you?
I'm doing extremely well today. A bit cold and a bit wet, but other than that.
Yeah, perfect. It is a bit cold and windy in Edinburgh today. Gordon, it's an immense pleasure and honor to have you.
Yeah, thanks
very much.
So Gordon is the Chief Data Scientist for Smart Data Foundry.
Correct.
What is the motto of Smart Data Foundry?
The motto of Smart Data Foundry, I think it's unlocking financial data for good. So,
what does that mean?
So Smart Data Foundry, we're a subsidiary of the University of Edinburgh, and we are based on what seems to be quite a simple mission, but it eventually gets fairly complex, and that is taking data that's commercially produced by financial companies, banks, lenders, credit risk agencies, all these people, and repurposing that data for use in looking at economic well-being, looking at alleviating poverty, looking at unemployment, homelessness, and all these socially good causes. Mm-hmm. The way we do that is we actually hold that data in a safe environment that's suitable for government, local government, academic researchers, researchers from non-government organisations, charities, to actually get in and use. Traditionally, those organisations would use survey data. Mm-hmm. And we're kind of, saying, well, we've got data that's captured in almost real time, whether that's financial transactions, whether that's business payroll, there's so much financial data out there. You can do the analysis you've always wanted to do. You don't have to rely on small samples. You can see things as they happen. You don't have to wait 18 months for, the ONS to issue some data to you. And it's hugely successful. I mean, there are so many data teams now springing up in all these organizations, data science teams, and they're advancing their technology and their software, and they are becoming ready for these kind of data. And we're there to kind of do that in a way that is safe, ethically sound, and is affordable, which is a really big thing, because on the commercial market, you can buy financial data. Yeah. It costs so much money. It prices out all of the organizations we work with. That's not really going to support the social good. And, there are a lot of people in a lot of local authorities, in governments, in charities, who are doing such amazing work with such vulnerable people in the UK. And it's such a broad base that by supplying these data, you can actually have a huge impact on the economy, economic growth, the well-being of people, health, and all these amazing things that, the housing crisis, all these amazing things we really need to be looking at.
So it is very interesting. So what I found the most interesting is obviously on the data side. We start with the data. Mm-hmm. So how does this work? Like you're saying that you're obviously working closely with financial institutions' data. Yeah. So do they approach you, and then is there a sort of a data center where you are storing that data, or is it like virtualized data?
So we work with data partners. We have some key data partners, NatWest Group and Sage, the accounting software platform, and Virgin Money as well. But we work with smaller data partners as well. They donate data. They spend their own resource and they help us out hugely. They donate their data to us. It is anonymized data. Data privacy is obviously a very big concern to us and them. It is very sanitized. It is looked at all the time. But it's transferred to us into what we call our trusted research environment, which is part of the Edinburgh Parallel Computing Centre. And that's a good, secure air-gapped environment where we can store that data, we can manage it, we can do analytics and modelling in that environment, and then we can supply it out to our own products. So the Economic Wellbeing Explorer we have is just a dashboard of these kind of data, or we can actually make that available with data science related tools in our environment for researchers to get in there and actually get close to the data.
Amazing. So interesting.
That is very amazing. Like, so all of that data is physically located in a data center.
It is. Yes, it is. It's very secure. It's also where NHS Scotland store the data.
Ah.
So, you know, we have a degree of flexibility in that environment, which means we can import the tools we need. It has restrictions. It's not public cloud. You know, we're working in an environment which doesn't have, you know, endpoints facing the internet. That has its own challenges, but we work in those bounds, and what we do is we apply various automation techniques, from good data engineering through to, you know, machine learning, creating great new features in the data and predictions, and then using generative AI to automate the experience of researchers going in there and our own analysts going in there to do their work. A lot of the challenges we have with AI is that we can't connect out to a foundation model, you know, being hosted on the internet. We have to take open source LLMs, a range of them, multimodal coding models, you know, thought models, and essentially create our own model servers internally, and set up things like VS Code Copilots using those models, set up agentic processes to help us automate our data pipelines or automate commentary for our reports in that kind of closed environment. And it's actually a really, really good challenge to have, because it teaches you a lot about kind of, you know, going into these very powerful but relatively basic environments with not a hugely limited tool set, but it's, you know, as I say, it's not like public cloud, and actually being able to go in, analyze how you want, visualize how you want, build applications how you want to, and automate all those processes as well.
That is absolutely. So I personally had no idea that the people, like the financial institutions, are donating data.
Yeah.
It's great, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's absolutely brilliant. And you know, not to plug it too much, but we need more data.
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly.
I think, you know, we're always working with people who are interested in it.
Yeah.
It's a long process to do that. We invest a lot of time in that process, and you know, our data partners invest a lot of time in that process. But the impact for the brand that is donating the data is absolutely huge. It is really big. You know, we get, for example, the chief economist at NatWest Group, when he does quarterly updates, he presents our data. You know, it's a really good thing to show for NatWest, and they put so much time and effort into their data donation and helping us out with that. Similar with Sage as well. It is a really good way for these companies to show that they are actually doing something good, you know, on their ESG agendas. They're actually showing that my data was used by somebody to inform their homelessness policy, which has had a positive effect on someone who is homeless, who is now not homeless. That's insane. That's why we do it.
And I think, you know, to pick up on the point you said there around impact, that's what is really interesting. You know, often when we think about how data is used, and particularly now, you know, with using AI as well, it's things like credit decisioning and some of those kind of, you know, more typical things. But it sounds like what you're saying here is that, you know, it can be used in a way for things like, you know, potentially determining financial vulnerability, other things that aren't, you know, those typical norms, and then to have an impact wider on things like public policy and stuff as well.
Yeah, so I think it's quite possible for financial institutions to look at financial vulnerability, right? Totally. Just like they look at fraud, or they look at insider fraud, or they look at cybersecurity or creditworthiness. But it's what you do with it.
Yeah.
So why are you looking at financial vulnerability? Yes, in a business, it is to make sure your customers are supported through the customer journey. But there is also an overarching agenda of, we need to make a viable product, and we need to make money, and we need to make revenue. When you take that overarching commercial angle out of it and take the data into our world, you have a much simpler view of the data. You're just there to make sure it gets to the people who are making decisions about those areas you're interested in. It's quite a kind of broad way we work, because we don't just work with local authorities, charities, and health professionals and people like this. We work with the Bank of England, we work with the FCA, and these people are looking at economic growth, and they're looking at employment. So one of the things and these are all big economic questions that look after the well-being of our entire nation or nations. One of the things we do at the moment is a piece of work with the Scottish Government, and we're looking at the feasibility of actually taking financial transaction data for consumers and creating or inferring from that employment statistics. So are people employed? Are they unemployed? Are they economically inactive? Now, this is to fill a gap that, labour force statistics, as we call them in the UK, they use survey data, and the response has been massively declining recently. And the analysts certainly in the Scottish Government and other governments, they want to know what's happening now. They don't want to know what's happening 18 months ago or 6 months ago or even a month ago. By using these data that are updated weekly, they can actually see employment changes as they happen across a big chunk of a representative sample of the Scottish population and further the UK. So
which is more important now, because the world is changing so fast.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can't wait for 12 months.
For survey results,
data to land, and then
exactly.
Quickly going back to the point of financial vulnerability. So from my personal background, I had done some work in my previous experience. So my experience there in terms of identifying, from regulatory conduct point of view, identifying people who are financially vulnerable, it's always difficult to put one particular financial institution's lens to it, right?
Okay, yeah.
Right, so more you gather data and you get a 360-degree view of it, which is, I suppose, what you are able to apply.
So in certain ways we can. The thing is that we get data that is anonymized. So what we don't see are individuals.
Right.
So we see individual level information, but what we can't see is link them across data sources. That would be a step too far in terms of data privacy. That is not what we're about. But what we can do, we can look at the demographics and so age and sex and very fine locations, and look at the patterns of how certain people are behaving in those locations, and then bring in other data linking in on location and demographics, and actually look at populations next to each other. So you could look at, for example, homelessness information and banking transaction information for these kind of demographic cells, and that is how you can actually start building up a picture of different personas.
That can start to feed into the strategy for both the financial institution as well as governments.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is a really interesting kind of dynamic there, because we do offer back to our data partners the information and the research that is done on their data, so they can see how their customers are working in society, not just in a financial point of view, from things like accommodation, health, well-being, and things like that. So it actually gives a huge picture to the financial companies about their customer base.
And you touched upon kind of the ethics and transparency part here. Something that was thinking in my head there that it might be interesting to kind of our listeners is around, where some of this data is then helping influence and allow decisions or things within public policy, etc. How do you kind of, how do you gain that public trust that the data, whilst it's anonymized, etc., is transparent and being used kind of for the right things?
So, we have GDPR regulations. We have very, very fastidious information governance rules and ethics rules as well. We can demonstrate where our data comes from, how it flows, from a technical point of view, where it goes.
Yeah.
Every researcher who accesses our data has to comply with ethical regulations, in general for a study to be supported by a research grant. And we, vet everybody robustly that uses our data to make sure that what they're doing, why they're doing it, they're only using the data they really need to use.
Yeah.
And we document all of this, and it becomes this transparent pipeline of, we can show you exactly who's using our data for what and when.
And I think that's so important now, isn't it,
Yeah.
for people to understand and thinking about the lineage of the data and, where it's from
Yeah.
and how it's being used. Yeah.
That goes right back into the discussion that we are having about knowing where your data is coming from, right?
But talking about public, we engage with the public.
Yeah.
We go out to the public and have public engagement sessions and talk about, what do you think about what we're doing with this data? If this was your data, how would you react? What are your reservations? What are you generally that's a positive thing. Wow, you're doing this with our data. But, you get that, we try and get that public engagement point of view, and that feeds straight back into the way we work with our data partners, how we process the data and what we use it for.
Amazing.
So I'm trying to sort of get my head around that because this is something, and this is where the world is becoming so interesting, right? So there are so many interesting work that is going on, and we really need to put the spotlight on those work. Now, obviously, talking about the fast-changing world, you have been with Smart Data Foundry for what?
8 months, 7 months? Yeah.
8 months.
Yeah.
Sounds like a lot, right? Like
Yeah.
a lot of happened over the last 8 months.
I just think it's a great organisation. It is.
Well, of course, yeah.
It's but the people are amazing, and I've never seen. There's 35, I think, of us. I've never seen so few people do so much work.
Yeah.
And it's so organised. It's such a tight ship, and it's just brilliant people to work with. We get so much done. So it feels like in 7 months, I've probably achieved more with Smart Data Foundry than I feel like I've achieved over the last 5 years with various financial companies. And that's no criticism of the financial companies. It's just we work on such great stuff, and we do so much so quickly, and it's just a very productive place to be.
Yeah, and then obviously in the last 8 months, a lot has changed, as we were discussing before. Newer products come in, newer data products come in, newer models come in.
Yeah.
So do you have these kind of conversations with people that you work with in terms of guiding them on the best usage, ethical usage of that data and models?
Yeah, absolutely. So from AI, using AI encoding assistants, or using AI to create commentary, or that kind of use of generative AI, through to the modeling approaches we use, through to how we push the data through our pipelines, how much automation we have. We are, every week we are pushing things forward in terms of automation and using new technology and things like that. One of the things we also have is, because we have researchers working with us, we have some extremely, extremely clever people who are always trying new methodologies. So as a data scientist, it's both extremely exciting and challenging to keep up with everything. So what we try to do is we learn from, because my background is financial data, I know how I would approach these data problems, but people in academia or in public sector, they approach them in very different ways, methodologically and technologically. And it's great to have that variability, and you learn so much, but you're always trying to make it better. You're always trying to improve our pipelines, put a slightly different approach to modeling in, tune the model slightly better, try a new foundation model because someone said someone said this one's better for this task, and you're like, right, we'll have it. It's a really fast moving place.
Yes.
So Gordon, what about any sort of kind of challenges or blockers? How do you balance that sort of the speed, innovation?
I'm trying to think of particular blockers. I think we're a small company. We are, always trying to expand our range in terms of the projects we get in.
Yeah.
So, one of the blockers really is we're a very small company. We're very ambitious. We can only do so much. So it's really one of the big blockers is the people we have in terms of the amount of people we have. We can't have a huge 60 data scientists and engineers and things like that. It's kind of 3 data scientists and an engineer and me. But we just use technology to scale. We are just automating as much as we can. We're using AI to, for example, the other day, we wanted to build a data science MLOps pipeline from scratch. And we drew it out in a diagram, and we were like, so where do we start? So we're just like, well, let's just put it through VS Code Copilot and let's use that image to create something.
Yeah.
And when we did that, and it wasn't perfect, it took us months of work on top of that to really get it where we wanted to. But it saved us like 8 weeks of work probably from doing it from scratch. Yeah. So I've built AI platforms and machine learning pipelines from scratch, and we did save that big chunk of time. And I think it's just focusing on those little things that we can do to free up people and just boost our productivity to give ourselves a really good head start.
Yeah.
Super. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thanks a lot for joining us.
Not a problem. It's been really good. Really good. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. So we have got Mel Morris and David Pugh-Jones with us from Corpora AI. Welcome, guys.
Hey, Mel. Hey, David.
Hey, Swag. Hi, Becky. How are you?
We are doing fine. We're doing fine. How are you?
Good.
Good, thank you.
So what we are going to see now, so probably Mel and David, we are going to start off with a demo of Corpora AI. We have obviously heard about it quite a lot, but the way we are going to do it is that let's start with a demo, and then we'll try to understand and we'll try to sort of analyze the product along the value chain that we have been talking about. So where is the data coming from, what kind of model is being used, and what kind of orchestration is being used, and who the potential adapters could be. So if that's all right, if we could start with the demo of the product.
So I'm just going to step you through this. So what we have here is some output from Corpora AI. And I have to say, that what I'm about to show you is an approach to which we've developed, which is able to leverage literally all of the academic, medical, and research papers available from an open source perspective, and of course many other documents as well, to look across all the domains of medicine in order to try and work out, firstly, what is the challenge in treating this disorder. What are the different approaches that could be taken to treat it today? And how might we think about coming up with an evolved solution that might get us closer towards treating this more successfully? Okay, so a pretty typical sort of set here. I'm having this document at the moment reviewed by a number of neuro-oncologists to get their feedback on it, which I've not had yet, but I'll step you through the breadth and depth of what we have here. Okay. Of course, in coming up with a new style of treatment, everyone recognizes you've still got to go through all the usual processes of testing, clinical trials, et cetera, et cetera. But the key thing here is to be able to put together, to be able to look across all of the different domains of knowledge, to be able to see exactly what could be possible. Okay. And it's quite extensive. That process starts with a problem definition. Okay. And so what happens is you would typically say, well, I'm looking at ways to improve the treatment of glioblastoma multiforme. And that will be your prompt. What will then happen is the product will go through and look at the challenges that exist in academic papers, other documents, to find out exactly what the scope of the problem would be, and then to come out with a problem definition, which is quite detailed. I mean, typically, 3 or 4 pages of content. What then happens is that the technology then takes that problem definition, once you've reviewed it, you're happy with it, and then goes across that to look at ways in which those challenges can be actually addressed. And it goes into a lot of detail with that. The final phase then, which is actually the hardest one of all, is then to cross-validate and to second-guess that solution ideation, to be able to actually say, well, what exists out there? This isn't as straightforward as just coming up with an idea. How would it be that idea would work? What are the challenges going to be? Are there any existing methods, processes, documents which would indicate that this has already been considered, this has already been attempted, or maybe already is commonplace in some cases where things already exist, or maybe things exist in a slightly different field, but in a similar sort of scenario. So we go across an evidential review, and then we also take a look at what is the possible timeframes it would take for someone to take this sort of solution, to take it from an idea through to a finished product. And the product automates all of those phases. And by the way, it does this for medical, and it also does it for pretty much every other walk of science as well. So pretty in-depth.
So, Mel, if I could sort of get my idea validated, to borrow your words. So essentially what we are looking at is that somebody would need to give possibly a broad problem statement, and then would need to go into Corpora and will need to see how that works out. And then ideas come out in terms of how that problems could be solved. And then the ideas get validated with further literature review and existing body of work. Is that correct?
That's correct. And that initial problem statement can be as short or as detailed as you would like it to be. I mean, clearly, if people are working in a space, they'll already have a pretty good understanding of the sort of challenges they've got. But it won't stop there. It will always look wider because people tend to become quite myopic in these sorts of areas about specific challenges. But we have to look at this thing holistically as well. So we'll take the problem statement, we'll then actually go across and expand that to make sure we're covering off all the bases that will also need to be considered. Otherwise, you end up with just something that's probably an adjunctive therapy as opposed to something that could actually be considered a holistic solution.
And Mel, who kind of tends to get the most value out of this? Is it kind of researchers? Is it more corporates? Who is it that gets the value out of it?
I think the value is in many different ways. Different people would perceive the information in different forms. So I'll give you an example. Someone who's actually at the coalface of this thing, actually looking literally at doing these treatments, would want to go into this thing and probably even then dive down to even more detail, right? And that's natural. That's just a part of the usual research process. Of course, there'll be times when people will say, I'm not quite sure about this. Maybe that will work, maybe it wouldn't. And so there's a lot of work that researchers would do in going through an iterative process before they're happy that they've seen enough information from fully attributed sources to justify what's being said and for them to agree with it or not. Now, for people that are, let's say, looking at this thing from say more of an administrative or more of a sort of a back office perspective, of course, they don't want to go quite so detailed. So they'll probably just look at the executive summaries, want to go through those to get an understanding of the sort of scope that's involved. And then we'll also have other people who'll be looking at it from the point of view of existing intellectual property to make sure that they want to go down this particular path. That might require licensing other technologies in the space that they want to accommodate. So there's many different use cases for the information, and we have different sort of outputs that can actually satisfy each of those constituents.
And if I'm kind of one of our listeners who's, following along today, who's already using maybe ChatGPT or Claude or something, for something similar, what are some of the kind of the benefits of using Corpora instead?
Well, it's a fundamentally different approach. So if you're going to talk to a foundational model, and there's some exceptional ones out there. I mean, for these sorts of use cases, you might be talking about something like Anthropic's Opus 4.6, which is their latest model that's sort of medically aware. You might be looking at Gemini 3 Pro or ChatGPT will be GPT 5.2. And you probably will be setting all these things to maximum reasoning, maximum effort, and maximum think time, and opening up the research that they can go and find using agentic processes behind that. But in so doing, you're going to get a relatively narrow response. The model itself has a good broad-based understanding and can go to a certain level of depth, and then we'll try and fill in the gaps a little bit with its ability to reason across that, and it will reach out probably with a search-based process then to go and try and look for additional documentation to satisfy specific queries that it's got. But the problem with that is that when you're using what's basically called a search RAG process, you're going out to use Google, these other things to find information. It all depends on the number of queries you've got, and then it depends on how successful that search process is in finding the information you require. Now, in our scenario, we're inverting this model. We're going and looking at the data sources first, we're taking a really wide-angled lens, looking at as much breadth as we can and as much depth of information without that delay of having to go and scrape pages on the fly. We already have this documentation on hand. It's in a hybrid data store that has both temporal, graph, and vector capabilities. And so we can fetch information literally in sub-second response times that can span literally tens of thousands or even millions of documents. So the approach here is far more extensive than you're going to get with a typical so-called deep research test with a Google Deep Research or Anthropic. It's data-driven. Now, there's another piece of that which is very important here, is that we're also not tending to use the foundational models because we already have a natural query language engine that is actually not only looking at all of the breadth and depth, but is then distilling the information down to the net unique content on each of the specific queries that are being run. So we don't have to worry about search results coming back with 20 results, of which most of them are much the same. We're able to distill that down to what the net unique content is across those. What we're then doing is we're then taking an approach which is then to reason ourselves across the topic to basically package up, to segment and cluster that data in a structure that suits the topic, and then to actually pass it to smaller models, typically compact models, leveraging their context windows accurately, but also to consider the attention span of the model to make sure that we're not getting skewed by the fact that if we give them, let's say, 5,000 snippets of information, we don't want it to be missing things at the back end of that because of problems in attention span by the model itself. So it's a very sophisticated process going to manage how the models are used. And we'll typically be doing hundreds of prompts as opposed to a small number with this and fetching supplemental data. So it's far more broad and far more deep on the subject. And as you'll see from this report here, this report will probably have citations going across 10, 20, 30,000 documents.
Right. So if I understood that correctly, so the architecture behind the scene is instead of using one particular frontier LLM, what you're using is an orchestration of multiple compact language models for specific use cases. Is that correct?
Yes, in fact, we're completely model agnostic, and we tend to favor. So the output I'm going to show you now was actually run on the GPT open source model, the 20 billion parameter model for GPT-OSS called GPT-OSS 20B. It's quite a small model because we don't need to use much of its reasoning, if any at all, because of how our engine is actually packaging and preparing the information. So because it's a smaller model, because it's getting more focused data, it has almost far lower chance, if not zero chance, of actually coming up with hallucinations. So you get a very crisp document.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to sort of get my head around this. So essentially we are utilizing something similar to an agentic framework where we are also optimizing the compute. Like we are not misusing compute where it is not needed, particularly for a given query. If a more compact model suffices, then use that. So that is the concept as I can understand here.
Yes, it is. And listen, we've done lots of testing across all different sizes and flavors of models. We chose to go with GPT-OSS 20B because it's a good broad-based model. It's extremely fast in operation. It has real consistency with the output. So we don't have to worry about different models having slightly different structures of how they want to choose to format output for us. So in this scenario, we've actually found this actually performs better than using a larger model, which takes longer to do, tries to overthink sometimes what's actually involved, and we get a more, let's say, more flavored response. Whereas what we really want is crisp information, specifically going to answer exact questions with very precise answers. And I'll step you through this to give you some ideas of that. So in this particular document here, the executive summary, this is from the cross-validation report, which contains all the three outputs combined. So this is the executive summary about the solution that has been ideated by the platform. Okay, so it goes through and says, well, here's what the problem is. It then goes through as to why the innovation fits the challenge. And at a relatively high level, it does a feasibility assessment and then goes through and talks about the development pathway and the strategic recommendations of what you would do to implement this. And I say, and we're not advocating this is to replace any researchers at all. This is to augment the research themselves. Of course, they have to do their due diligence, and we provide full citations for them to be able to do that pretty quickly. But let me step you through the process. So this is just literally covering off what it is from a high-level perspective. We then have the abstract of the actual ideation itself. This was what the second phase was, of doing the ideation of the solution. And then we come in then to a validation summary, which goes through each of the specific areas of this solution for treating this disease holistically. So there's many aspects to it. And then we have these two scores, what we call an evidence level and what we call a time frame. So if these things are dark green, it tends to imply that if it's an evidence, it's well proven. If the timescale is green, it implies it's something you could do in the near term. And as you move towards, let's say, less evidence, you'll see it's very much a traffic light structure. Probably better if we see it from this perspective, because this now explains to us what the two things are, the evidence level and the time frame. And it gives us then a high-level summary for each of the topics to step us through. This particular case here is already in active use. It's available now. Okay, so it's saying as part of the solution, you need this. It already exists. It's already been proven. It's available now. The next one says, well, okay, this is not available now, but it is explicitly described in academic documentation. But the estimate is it will be something like a 2 to 4 year time frame to fully test it out and prove it. And it steps through each of the parts of the solution in that form.
I'll just add to that. We've already seen with our own research, both in the US and the UK, analysing data analysts, researchers that have utilised or had access to the technology and how they use AI. And we're already seeing that we're saving them 25% of their time, so 10 hours a week on average for a 40-hour week, of time utilised to solve research scenarios, and specifically even around patent searches, which is fundamentally important to some of those scientists that are looking to explore whether it's actually out there already or if they can infiltrate that with their own IP. So again, we're sitting on so much data, and I think, Swag, you mentioned it earlier as well, which is absolutely fascinating. This is UK sovereign AI technology. Fundamentally, that is important in comparison to all of the conversations going on around the world. And the other thing is because we sit on this data already, the compute scenario, which will never go away, which becomes a bigger question mark about exactly what happens and how do we then try and surface all of this data and the demand for AI. Because we sit on that means less compute, significantly more sustainable and better for those individuals that use it.
Yeah, I think from the adoption and the application point of view, it sort of now we understand a little bit better, and I think this was a good exposure to our audience as well in terms of what. So we didn't have a whole lot of time, but at least a glimpse into what are the things that are possible. But quickly going back to the pipeline, and particularly on data, and David, you mentioned about the sovereignty of data, and you know where I'm coming to with this. And I think Mel, you also mentioned about the data that is behind, that is driving this. Where is that data, and who owns and manages that data?
Well, the data in this is basically open source or data that can be licensed if you have the right licenses to obtain it. But the data is actually stored in the UK. Okay, it's stored in the UK. It's on our own servers in a co-location facility. But importantly, we can actually provide a replica of that for any organization to actually run that in-house. So with Corpora, you have a choice of a totally cloud-based solution, fetching data from our servers and using models, let's say in AWS or OpenAI or Google, if that's what you wish to do. Or you can choose to run it in-house for the purpose of doing the AI components using a model like GPT-OSS 20B or one of the other open source models in-house, fetching the data from our data center, or you can have the entire solution in-house with both the data and the AI components running there. And I even have the ability on my laptop, which is a pretty powerful laptop, but I can actually run all of the AI components on my laptop. Now, I fetch the data then from our data servers, and all of the processing is then done on a GPU on my laptop. It's an RTX Pro 5000.
Right, and then probably last question from my side would be, let's say I run a research organization and I want to onboard Corpora, right? And then obviously there are things that needs to be done in terms of, as you're saying, decisions need to be taken, whether to go on-prem or whether to sort of fetch from the private cloud. But can you give us a sense of the overall cost estimate in terms of what are the different things, and particularly some of the hidden costs that sometimes do not get mentioned?
Okay, well, let's step through the components of what you would need to do that, okay? So firstly, if you're going to run the AI element of this, running the models, that side of things in the cloud, then you would choose to go with one of the vendors. I mean, whether that's going to be the likes of OpenAI or AWS or Google, they will be your choice. And they're your choices to make. We're completely agnostic to that choice. We would recommend using the compact models. So in the case of OpenAI, we would be talking about using the likes of, let's say, 4.1 mini while it's still around, but 5.1, 5.2, using minimum effort for reasoning because it's not required. But if you were to run, let's say, with AWS, where you've got a choice of all the open source models, then you could run GPT-OSS 20B. And I'll quickly flick to the top of this to give you some idea of what I'm talking about here, because this particular report includes complete details of what the model requirements were. So as we can see here, we used GPT-OSS 20B. It was running inside AWS using their Bedrock facility. We put in 1.3 million tokens, and we got back out just over 250,000 tokens. If you look at the pricing for that element of this part of the process, then you're going to come out with a cost of around, well, less than 30 cents for the AI component to do the entire report, if you're using AWS and the GPT-OSS 20B model. Okay. Now, if you want to run this part of it in-house, then you would need to have a GPU. We probably would talk about, you could easily get a system in place for between 50 and 100,000 pounds that would give you more than enough power. I can even do it on my laptop. That was 11,000 pounds. It would take longer. It would take longer. Instead of 5 minutes, this job took 5 minutes, 17 seconds to run. On a laptop, that probably would be more like 20 minutes. Okay. But of course, in that scenario, there's no AI cost. You've got your hardware, you're running it. Now, in terms of the data set that drives this, behind this, our Corpora data set, that sits on a server. It can be on a single server. It's a powerful server. You need a large system. We use a twin AMD Turin server-based box, which has a large amount of storage on it. We're talking about a capital cost there, running around about £300,000 for the equipment, and then it's the license for the Corpora data store software and engine that sits on top of that, and that's by negotiation based on the use case that people have. But what we're talking about is a system that actually has probably the lowest operational costs of any solution out there, because we're not having to rely on foundational models having to reason and do all the work for us. We're providing with very, very specific topic-oriented data sets that are properly conditioned and packaged to maximize the use of AI.
Actually, Mel touched on something there as well, because if you're talking about enterprise-grade research technology, we know that is expensive, and those big corp tech companies are paying for it. But equally, we also flipped it on its head and launched an accelerator program in December, specifically for innovative companies, whether they be in the UK or further afield, that could then utilize the technology, utilize the capabilities we have, utilize all of the ambassadors and the professors that we have in residence, and the amplification and the knowledge that comes out the back of them using this on a daily basis. So effectively looking at those scale-ups and startups that need R&D, but they've got the capability in-house from a resource point of view and the human scientist value, but they haven't got access to something like this, and that's where we can flip it on its head.
Well, certainly my interest has been piqued. So I'll
amazing.
certainly look forward to learning more about Corpora, and I'd definitely like to sort of play around with it if possible. But thanks a lot. Thanks for joining, Mel and David. Thanks for your time. It was really eye-opening and quite interesting discussion.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much, both.
Thank you, Swag. Thank you,
Thank you.
Rebecca. Really appreciate it. Have a good day.
Wow, that was really fascinating, wasn't it?
That was fascinating, and that was quite a sort of a fact-packed episode that we had.
Yeah, I was going to say there was lots of technical stuff in there, but I think what it really comes down to is it's just incredible now.
Yeah.
What we're seeing, particularly with
Yeah.
the use of data and how
Yes.
AI can just transform
Yes.
the ways that we're using that. An example there from a medical sense. Yeah, just really interesting.
And hopefully we were also able to sort of give a sense to our audience in terms of how to break down a product.
Yeah.
Right? And how to ask the right questions. Is it, where is the data coming from? What kind of model is being used? What kind of orchestration is being used around those models? So that gives sort of a better understanding to a sort of a product that they're probably sort of looking to buy or sell.
Yeah.
But
It all comes back to that kind of value chain, doesn't it, that we spoke about at the start?
Absolutely. And you know what, I would really love to, I know that we have got, now that we have got so many viewers, I can really be bold and put it out there. Please don't be shy to put in your comments. Let us know what you think about it. Let us know what you think about sovereignty. Let us know what you think about the value chain. Let us know about your experiences. Like, are you in a sort of a spot where you are not sure the product that you want to buy or sell? Let us know and we can have a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important to hear from our listeners what you want to get out of this podcast as well. Although I think that's all we've got time for today,
Yes.
Swag. Again, please hit the subscribe button. Please tell your friends about us. And yeah, we're hoping to get more than 67,000 listeners for this next episode.
Yes,
We'll keep
let's
our
make
fingers
it happen.
crossed.
Let's make it happen. And then see you guys next month.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.